My name's Colette and I'm one of the advanced practice leads for Cumbria County Council within the adults team. And myself and Kelly are going to be running through today's session, and I'll just let Kelly introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm Kelly Short. I'm the designated nurse for adult safeguarding for Morecambe Bay CCG safeguarding team, and I'm also the learning and development chair for the subgroup of the Cumbria Safeguarding Adult Board as well.
The very nature of today's session is quite an emotive subject, and it could be challenging on all sorts of different levels. So if you do feel that you need any support, obviously contact your usual routes of support for that, such as your team manager or your colleagues, but also Kelly and I are happy to be contacted if you need to discuss anything from the session today. Our contact details will be at the end of the slide, so you'll have them before we finish. In terms of today and what we're wanting to achieve today, we're going to provide an overview of the case of Barry, and we're going to look at the SAR criteria and any learning and recommendations from Barry's SAR. We're also going to provide you with some information about the Cumbria Safeguarding Adult Board, the website and information that you can find on there. And hopefully you'll be able to access links that are embedded through the PowerPoint to get to some of the information that we referenced today as well. So I'm just going to pass over to Kelly and she's going to explain a little bit more about safeguarding adult reviews.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you, Colette. So in terms of what is a safeguarding adult review? So when the Care Act came into force in 2014, the Care Act put a statutory responsibility on each of the safeguarding adults boards to ensure that they had an arrangement in place to undertake a safeguarding adult review when a case involved an adult with care or support needs, and that was whether or not the local authority were actually meeting those care needs or not. And why this is in a case where an adult has died, which also includes suicide, which is really important for this particular case, or is seriously harmed, and the Safeguarding Adults Board knows or suspects that this is as a result of abuse or neglect. And also another key element in terms of the safeguarding adults review criteria, there needs to be reasonable concern about how members and multi-agencies and organisations work together to safeguard the individual or the adult involved. Now, for the purpose of this particular definition, significant harm for a SAR criteria is defined as life-limiting incident, which also includes psychological harm from which there will be no recovery. If we can just move on to the next slide, please, Colette. So in terms of what's the purpose of the SAR, so essentially the purpose of the SAR is to prevent future deaths or serious harm, and it's an opportunity to promote effective learning and improvement action to prevent, again, those future deaths or serious harm from occurring. And it's about learning lessons from the case and to make sure that those lessons are applied to future cases by all agencies, for in this instance across Cumbria, to prevent that harm occurring again. It's an opportunity to promote multi-agency working and to work through any kind of blockages or challenges or obstructions which, as a partnership, that we might be facing, and gives us the opportunity to strengthen multi-agency working. And also it's an ideal time to review those challenges and then look at effectivenesses of the any policies or procedures which we currently have in place, to review the impact of those in practice. And then we can also, if we've identified any improvements required or development needs from either policies or procedures or in our services, it gives us the chance to review them and to look at that again. And also really important and really key, it gives us the opportunity to share any good practice which has been identified across the system as well. And I think we're over. And on the next slide. So when we're requesting a site, it's really important. We've been undertaking SARS now for quite a good period of time, and what we do find on some occasions around the quality of SAR referrals which come into the system is often quite poor. So it's really important that agencies seek support from the safeguarding leads within each of our own organisations to support the completion, of a SAR referral being undertaken. And it's absolutely key around the quality element and answering how and why the SAR referral which you are putting into the system meets the criteria. So in terms of who can undertake or make a SAR referral, it can be any organisation who has worked with or working with the adult where we've got concerns of that serious abuse, neglect and harm. It could be any of the members of the Safeguarding Adults boards and their agencies, but also equally it could be the individual themselves concerned, their family members, or another interested party. For example, it could be through a coroner's process. So various different routes in terms of submitting a SAR referral into the system. And then just on the next slide, in terms of the Safeguarding Adults Board, on the Cumbria website, there's an opportunity here for you to access the relevant SAR guidance and documentation in order to support those SAR referrals coming into the system. On the right side there, you will see what the SAR referral form looks like. Again, if you do require support in terms of putting in those referrals into place, you can refer to the guidance or again contact your safeguarding leads in the systems to help you complete those documentation. So any links within the presentation should take you through to those particular and relevant pages on the Safeguarding Adults website. Thank you, Colette.
I'm going to play a very short video and it will just give you a basic overview of the background to Barry's situation, and it really will just scratch the surface as to what happened. But for those of you that aren't familiar with Barry or haven't read the report, then it will give you a bit of a basis to build on for the rest of the session. So if I can maybe get a little thumbs up off you, Kelly, if you can hear it when it starts, that'd be great. Yeah. Thank you. Barry died on the 23rd of May 2019. He was aged 70. He had taken an overdose of medication in his car, parked in his GP surgery car park. Barry left a suicide note with boxes containing prescribed medication and empty blister packs found next to him. Barry was a lonely man with few friends and very limited family contact. Barry lived alone and was not a member of many community groups. He is known to have moved about frequently and moved to Cumbria in the late spring of 2018. Barry suffered from depression and loneliness and accessed numerous services for support during his time in Cumbria. Barry stated to professionals that the death of his mother in 2008 had a negative impact on his mental health. The review highlighted several key themes as areas for learning and action. And it's those themes that we're going to look at further today. If you haven't already, then I would recommend reading at least the learning brief, which is the shorter document that's come out of the SAR, the link to which is here on this screen, but also the full report, which gives you a lot more detail and a lot more context around Barry's life and the support that he was receiving. And that support was really excellent at times as well, and it's important that we recognise that. We will be covering some of the positives that came out of the SAR for Barry later on today as well. But if you are interested in reading more about him, the link there will take you to the learning brief and the website where you can get the full report. So I'm just going to pass you back over to Kelly.
So in terms of the Barry SAR, there were a number of key themes which actually came out as learning points, and of which we're going to concentrate on today as we continue through the rest of the session. Some of those areas included the effectiveness of services assessing and responding to the needs of Barry, around the coordination of services working together, referral systems and processes, and also loneliness as well. So we're going to look into those different areas in much more detail in just a moment. So if we could go on to, so the first element we're going to look at is around the effectiveness of services assessing and responding to Barry's needs. Thank you. So I think at this point it's really important that we understand the definition of an adult at risk. So presently there is no nationally agreed definition of an adult at risk. However, within the Care Act 2014, an adult at risk is defined as any person who is aged over the age of 18 who has care and support needs and is experiencing risk of abuse and is unable to protect themselves from either the risk or the experience of abuse and neglect. So Barry's case is a little bit strange really, in terms of he didn't actually fit within this definition at all, and as he wasn't at risk of abuse and neglect by others, so to speak, and a section 42 assessment around safeguarding actually wouldn't have been appropriate for Barry. So I think that's really important to think about and just to take in at this point. However, he was deemed to, at different times during the last 6 months of his life, to be at risk of suicide. So within this particular report, we are just looking at the last 6 months of Barry's life. And you'll find as we move throughout the report, a lot happened in this particular time frame. And due to the Care Act definition, those adults who are at risk of suicide are not systematically discussed within the safeguarding forum within Cumbria. So people are only referred regularly to third sector organisations to support around suicidal thoughts. However, by not falling within the criteria for multi-agency safeguarding responses, options to respond to Barry's needs were effectively really limited. And as a result, Barry's needs were not responded to effectively, and this appears to have increased his frustrations that his perceived needs were not actually being met. Along with other factors, his frustrations do appear to the contribution to around his decision to take his own life, sadly. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So we're just going to talk a little bit further around the effectiveness of services assessing and responding to Barry's needs. So the information Barry repeatedly gave was that he was lonely and he was socially isolated. There were many offers of support to address this, which came out of the review as that was undertaken. Records show that Barry did have mental health issues, which included anxiety and depression. Now, some of these issues throughout the report are related to his health needs, and some of them are identified to his social care needs and are very much related. So in order to deal with Barry's case in a more joined-up approach, it would have been better for health and social care joined-up working to have been undertaken. These issues needed to be resolved and they needed to be managed in that joined up early intervention approach, and this would have definitely been much more effective than relying on a referral system, which we'll talk about shortly in more detail, but proved not to be effective when the service user's needs don't quite fit into the front door criteria of service providers which were being offered to him. So we've already identified he did have mental health issues which affected his outlook and his motivation around his social issues. So being isolated and lacking that motivation to socialise and to carry out his daily functions and activities then did have a massive impact on his mental health. And his mental health and his social issues were interconnected and definitely impacted on each other. And as we'll find out as we move through the presentation, there were numerous interventions which took place And it has been identified that many professionals tried really hard to provide a high-level service for Barry. But on many occasions, interventions by professionals were effective in reducing Barry's level of anxiety in the short term. But definitely in the short term, you know, his needs were being met frequently by professionals just speaking to Barry and providing him with reassurance. However, this wasn't effective for the long-term solutions for meeting his needs. Those conversations didn't resolve that, essentially. And this seemed to enable a cycle where Barry's needs were being met and issues were being managed on kind of daily contact and daily reassurance. And that did have a personal effect on behalf of the practitioner rather than on behalf of Barry, rather than the long-term solution being identified and being explored further. So there are examples within the report whereby teams were under the impression that Barry was open to other services. Unfortunately, this wasn't always the case, and at times no actual conversations were actually taking place between teams. There were evidence where updates were made using voicemail, and assessments were missed or weren't actively undertaken. So, for example, Care Act assessments had been requested on 3 separate occasions, but actually were never actioned at any point. So in the first few days of December 2018, Barry had 4 contacts with the single point of access line and the ALICE team, which is a mental health provider. An MDT meeting was convened and the ALICE team saw Barry in person and provided reassurance. Now, the MDT just involved those mental health services. Here, there's a missed opportunity to really widen that group and include professionals from social care and also from his GP practice who had a lot of contact also with Barry. So on an ad hoc basis, this would have enabled a much wider understanding of Barry's situation and enabled a much better joined up approach between mental health, GP and social care teams. However, Barry's mental health needs and social needs were dealt with in isolation, which really did lead to ineffective outcomes for Barry and again repeated inefficiencies in the service which was being provided. And the constant referral and signposting from single agencies to single agencies rather than adopting a working together approach, we've already said, was really inadequate and ineffective. A different approach was required, again, never activated. This is because the level of personal service and the professional service which professionals were giving to Barry enabled his day-to-day anxiety to be managed, as we've already alluded to. Now, it's not known whether a multi-agency response would have been more effective, but it wasn't tried, and I think that's the key point. It's clear that single agency responses were not able to resolve Barry's needs in the longer term. There were no multi-agency conversations or meetings to discuss his care, and the single teams or agencies ended up making individual decisions to stop their services or not to activate them without actual any consultation with other professionals. So again, that intervention and that way of working in isolation had a massive impact on the outcome in this case. And consequences of the services ceasing for Barry or not getting involved resulted in an increased visit to the GP, for example, where Barry reported increasing suicidal thoughts and feeling of isolation. He himself requested a Care Act assessment, and 2 other requests were made, but these were missed, as we've mentioned. So he was often declined services. Sometimes he told mental health services that his issues were social care related. So in effect, he wasn't offered the most appropriate support and services. And it was made more challenging, you know, with Barry interpreting his care needs himself to different professionals. It was really challenging for professionals to know what action and point of action to take place and to identify his needs and put the most appropriate measures in. So it did allow for real high numbers and interventions and contacts and appointments and referrals happening. So we're looking within that last 6 months period, 239 contacts were made and over 100 referrals. So it's a really clear indicator that even though Barry seemed unwilling at times to help himself, the systems used by professionals wasn't effective in responding to his needs. So I'll hand over to you at this point, please, Colette.
Thanks, Kelly. And the next few slides are just really to reinforce what Kelly's been saying there, in terms of highlighting that to-ing and fro-ing that Barry was experiencing between services. And you'll maybe remember what some of these services are, but for those of you that might be less familiar, I will just explain as I go along what the abbreviations mean. So Barry moved to Cumbria in spring 2018, and he had contact with services almost from the off via GP initially and subsequent referrals. So he was involved with the community mental health assessment and recovery team. Referrals were made to them, and follow-up referrals from them to the Compass assessment, which is an assessment that looks at sort of third sector organisations and community resources that might have been available to support Barry. He's also self-referred himself in November of 2018 to First Step. For anybody that's not familiar with First Step, they offer free talking therapies to people that are experiencing mental ill health or have got a diagnosed mental health condition. And there was also a Hawke assessment, which is a health and wellbeing coach who are employed by Cumbria County Council. They completed their first assessment in that November as well, with a view to looking at supporting Barry. And later on in November, we do start to see Barry really struggling, and he's attended A&E with what he's describing as headaches, anxiety and suicidal thoughts. Now, there was no role for the Alice team at that time, and he went home. And in the December, there was the MDT discussion that Kelly was just explaining there, and re-referral back to community mental health services. And a further Hawke assessment took place, which resulted in a referral to the Silver Line. And again, for those of you that aren't familiar with that, the Silver Line is a telephone befriending service, and that was a referral that was made at that time. In the new year, it's a New Year's Day, Barry had presented back at A&E where he's feeling really sad, and a GRIST assessment took place, and that again is I'm sorry for all of the abbreviations in here, but I do want to explain what they are as well. Was an assessment tool for assessing the risk of suicide, self-harm, harm to others, self-neglect and vulnerability. And at that time, Barry was identified as being low risk on that assessment. And in the January, whether that triggered a change, I don't know, but in the January of 2019, Barry actually moved out of Cumbria and moved to Yorkshire, and he was referred to what's an equivalent service to our health and wellbeing coaches here called the health trainers in the February of that year. And there was a lot of records of attempts to contact Barry unsuccessfully, but they did manage to make that referral. And in April, Barry actually moved back to Cumbria. So I think you can probably get a feel for how Barry was, and this is referenced quite heavily in the report, that he did often move around, and that's a really important factor to help shape your understanding as to what was going on for Barry in terms of that isolation and loneliness. And again, you can see that he's referred to GPs, to the Hawkes, referred back to Alice again, and no identified needs for admission in the May of 2019, where Barry was beginning to express that he is feeling suicidal, and the issues of loneliness were having a real increased impact on his mental health. And then sadly, a lot did happen in the May, in the build up to Barry's death. So there were further referrals to adult social care, the Hawke service. There was also further discussion with the Alice team around the home treatment pathway, but Barry actually felt that that wasn't what he needed. He was wanting to explore supported living accommodation, which is one of the reasons the Care Act assessment had been made, which, as we've heard, wasn't picked up, unfortunately. So there was a further GRIST assessment in the May, and you'll see more input from mental health services and a further request for that Care Act assessment. And unfortunately, that, as we've said, didn't happen. And Barry was found dead in his car, having taken an overdose of medication. And that was on the 23rd of May. He had left suicide notes, and they all said very similar things. And I think it's just important to really appreciate how desperate and lonely Barry was feeling at that time. And again, just another visual for the contacts within that time. So the 239 makes up a total of contacts, appointments, assessments and interventions over a 6-month period. So that, whereas the timeline started from when Barry moved into Cumbria in the early 2018, this is actually just for the last 6 months of his life. And as I'm sure you'll appreciate, that's a significant number of contacts. Now, the safeguarding report also found that there was a lack of care coordination between agencies working with Barry, with these frequent contacts and referrals between agencies. And the GP, as we've heard, was seeing him on an almost daily basis. And the learning outcome that came from this is that we really need to ensure that agencies and professionals are supported when dealing with complex cases, or people who are attending and referring to services frequently, and understand when and how to activate multi-agency involvement or respond to effective care coordination. And that's why we're doing events like this, to sort of highlight that importance, and for hopefully some links to be formed across professionals as well through discussion, and have a greater understanding as to what various teams can do. I'm going to hand you back over to Kelly, and she's just going to talk through the referral systems and processes that came out of the report as well. You're still on mute.
Sorry, apologies everybody. Right, thank you, Colette. So just looking into a little bit more detail in terms of the referral systems and processes. So we've established there were over 100 referrals which were made between agencies and teams regarding Barry in those last 6 months of his life. Now, the referral system hasn't been effective in resolving Barry's needs, and in some instances it took really long periods of time for referrals to get to the desired recipient as well. So whilst they've been evident and that there's sincere desire from many of the professionals and practitioners working to help Barry and to provide appropriate support, the referral system has actually created a degree of ineffectiveness for Barry. There was an over-reliance on the referral system, with Barry's case being repeatedly communicated to another team or department, rather than a team or department coordinating a more effective response. So there were also issues where referrals were inappropriate for the role and inappropriate to the services in which they were being sent to. And individually, practitioners tried extremely hard to serve Barry, but the current system just let down those with repeated needs that cannot be dealt with by single agencies alone, such as a GP, for example. Currently, there appears to be a system whereby referrals are lost, and again, we really do need to look at this in much more detail, really, within our own agencies. And if a case reaches a certain amount of referrals without the case being resolved by an individual agency or team, we need to have a system or approach in place which triggers a multi-agency review of the case, or a complex case meeting, however you want to call it. Not only would this provide a better service, but it would reduce the inefficiencies, the consistent re-referrals into the system. Another issue which was picked up, there were very little leadership was shown in pulling together those multi-agency responses. It was also on, or it appears to be, on many occasions, a referral to another agency or team was viewed as an outcome that concluded involvement for the referring agency or the team. However, in reality, a referral isn't an outcome for obviously the person involved. It appears to have been a method for moving the case elsewhere for another practitioner to attempt to resolve Barry's issues and to deliver support. Sometimes this was necessary, especially for primary health cares like GPs, to activate services beyond their remit. However, in this case, it appears to have been an over-reliance, which we've already mentioned, to a referral system to find a solution for Barry's needs, and it didn't. The solution was never found for Barry because his needs didn't match those criteria for those most services. Within community care agencies and organisations, I've said that already. In Barry's case, assumption, I've completely lost my train there. Let me get back. So the lack of collective view of the frequent attendances, repeated referrals, for specific services led to a failure to gain an overall picture of Barry's needs, and plan to support him wasn't created. On an individual basis, agencies and teams did establish Barry's needs based on the information which was available to them at the time. This information was gathered from assessments, referrals, and often a lot of information which Barry himself did provide. It's clear that Barry was listened to and his decision making was respected. However, there were discrepancies in the information from referrals and the information again which Barry provided himself. His needs often changed from the time the referrals were sent to the time of them being picked up and any contact taking place. And again, there's some instances where Barry refused some treatment that was appropriate to meet his needs. And we did, as professionals, rely on the information which Barry provided to take his wishes into account, and it did have an impact on influencing the services he received. So in a way, his voice was acted upon by professionals, with all good intentions to meet his wishes, which again just sadly didn't come to the outcome that we all had hoped, really, in this particular case. Thank you, Colette.
Thanks, Kelly. So a big factor that I'm sure you've picked up yourselves from Barry's case is just how lonely he was and the impact that this had on his life. He had no contact with family and very little contact with friends, and he was somebody that moved around a lot. Being lonely has got a significant impact on well-being and quality of life. Age UK research suggests that people are more likely to be lonely if they've nobody to open up to, or widowed, if they've got poor health, if they feel that they don't belong in their neighbourhood or their community, and if they're unable to do what they want, and if they live on their own. Barry experienced most of these factors, and his loneliness had a negative impact on his mental health. We all need to consider the impact of loneliness and explore how agencies can work to improve outcomes for adults with care and support needs, and raise awareness of the impact of loneliness on the wider health issues. This link here, the government work on loneliness, it is a big government initiative, and it's something that we all within our roles need to be thinking about. So if you are interested in reading a bit more about what's going on there, that link will take you there. But what else can we be doing? So in terms of supporting the people that we come across. This isn't about us having all of the answers as professionals. You know, we all come from different backgrounds. We've got a range of people here today, but there's certain things that we can have either an awareness of or a knowledge of that will potentially help people that are experiencing loneliness. And this is taken from the Royal College of Nursing website. And it just makes some suggestions for ways in which we can all help. You know, basic things like making sure that somebody's got their hearing tested or their sight tested and have got the appropriate aids to be able to engage in conversation with people. About the value of volunteering their skills and sharing what they know with a group of people as a way to combat loneliness. So there's lots of different things that we can be doing to help the people that we come across. And as I say, you know, as busy professionals, it's not possible for us all to deal with every single one of these elements, but knowing where we can support people and who we can ask to support people with some of this is really beneficial.
Feedback. I'm going to feedback from the notes I made, but I think anybody who had any thoughts and everybody was able to sort of participate. So please jump in. So, and I'm not sure if I can even read my own writing now, which is a bit of a worry. So when we talked about services for people who experience loneliness, many of the services that people thought of were really around the local areas, in particularly the West. So West seemed to be really represented. And options there included befriending service. There's a local befriending service, but then we also talked about Age UK's befriending service, which I know I've worked with myself. The role of social prescribers. In Copeland, they have a directory which accepts self-referrals for people, and many of the people who access services don't meet statutory thresholds for access to other services, which is, especially in this case, I think is really relevant. Sam talked about Women Out West, which is a group which I think it was for, I don't know what the age threshold was. I've just looked it up online. I think it was 55 plus. For women, a group for men called Mind Your Maras. I don't know how you spell Maras. You know, the Carlisle Maras, West
You're not
Maras.
Cumbrian enough, Jan.
No, I can't do it. And Men in Sheds. Now, I remember Men in Sheds when it was
Oh,
set
yeah.
up. And I'm not sure if it's still running.
Yeah, educate.
Men in Sheds was Age UK.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked about Growing Well in the South, which is just down the road from us, which is referred to by the mental health team here. I know Knit and Natter, Copeland Befriending, which is again as part of the befriending service. We talked about barriers to accessing services which can be referred to, which people can self-refer to, and we said people are often nervous to go on their own, and there's a definite role for a person to support that first step, that crossing the threshold. And often that's difficult because often that professional may not be an obvious statutory role for them to take that person to the service, but there's definitely a role to kind of cross the door, you know. Declan talked about isolation experience for people in Cumbria who've got remote villages, low levels of population density, people are spread out, and the impact of COVID. People are more isolated, less face-to-face contact. Things that I mean, one of the thoughts I had was we've accessed so much. This is via technology. That's not easy for everybody who experiences loneliness, especially in older population. Mm-hmm. We said loneliness is a massive issue, and one of the comments made by Sam was, "You don't have to be a vulnerable adult to be lonely." Yeah. And that's about it. Can anybody else think of anything I've missed there? Oh, I asked about referral routes from professional agencies, and the police routes is through liaison and diversion, and so via custody, but also safeguarding desks at the control room. So there seem to be so especially the police seem to have a formal option in terms of accessing third sector agencies and a kind of diversion to agencies which are better placed for supporting people with loneliness. And that's it. Now I will shut up.
Oh, they're really, really helpful points, and I particularly like the point about that it's not just older people, it's not just a certain group of people that can be lonely, and it's about breaking down them assumptions sometimes as well, that just because somebody appears to have contact with other people, that doesn't mean that they're not lonely. That's really, really important. Thank you. And Kelly's room, anybody from Kelly's room? Did you draw the short straw as well, Kelly?
Well, it's Friday afternoon and everyone's, I'm just really pleased we had some really good discussions. So I did take notes down, and we didn't formally say me, but I'll take one for our team and then just provide some feedback. So we had a little bit of discussions around, we identified around Age UK and in terms of their befriending service. And I think it was Julie who was saying to us, from the single point of access perspective, they do a lot of referring into the befriending service. And what's really positive around that service is they give you feedback in terms of, they tell you if the referral has been accepted, the outcomes of the referral, you know, in terms of the experience for the individual, if it's been positive or otherwise, and what the plan might be for that individual going forward. So that's really, really positive working. So that was really good in terms of the service. Now, I think it was Andrea, so Andrea, please correct me if I'm wrong, who was mentioning within their team, which is a community health team, they've got a third sector referral coordinator embedded within their team. So they attend the morning huddles every day, and then they will refer into any of the other organisations, you know, in terms of any cases that they've got, active cases, and it's really positive, and they've got, you know, it's really good working relationships into those different services. And then we were talking about Lisa, just as we were moving into this group, around Lisa's services, the Home Instead, who Lisa works for, and they offer a companionship service, particularly for, you know, in recent times, during COVID, you know, people haven't seen people for 15, 18 months, and helping to support and integrate people back into society and into, you know, services again to help alleviate their anxieties. So that's part of the work Lisa's team. Lisa, have I done that justice, or do you want to mention? Right, I'll take you on mute, but I'll take that as.
Thank you. Yes, that was great.
Yeah, brilliant.
Really important work.
And then just finally, what happened, we identified, we had a bit of a case discussion then. So Julie mentioned a particular case which is very similar to Barry. And, you know, this particular lady who's bouncing around those services at the moment, where they have had some multi-agency discussion and the issue hasn't yet been resolved. But then Ruth, who works within a social worker within Cumbria County Council, offered some really good advice in terms of the Care Act assessment route and the benefits that can bring in, and the support that, you know, we identified Barry's Care Act assessments didn't take place, but, you know, when they do take place, obviously the positive elements of those discussions and the full Care Act assessment and the outcomes of those. So we did have a case discussion, and I think it helped to support Julie with the lady that she raised, and we just identify, you know, lots of these are internal barriers, you know, around not meeting people's thresholds and criterias, and obviously when individuals, not their fault, but saying different things to different agencies, which often kind of causes some conflict, and really that the importance of that care coordinator really needs to be identified at the earliest stage, and that needs to be really the most trusted, I guess, the most trusted person for people as well. You know, it might take you know, a key worker, it might be the GP who they've got a really good trusted relationship to help coordinate some of this work, but it might be a social worker or a mental health practitioner. But identifying early a key person to coordinate is absolutely essential, and I think that kind of summarises our conversations in that space of time.
It's a lot to get through in 15 minutes. Well done. No, really good points. And as I say, we will add all of those onto the slides that you get so that it can be a point of reference coming back. So these are just some that we thought of when we were sort of preparing the presentation, and it's just a lot of similar things to what you've mentioned, really, as some ideas, and also the visual impairment charities, sight advice, deaf associations. If we think back to that prior slide around, making sure people have got the basics to be able to communicate with. And as we've mentioned, it's not around us as individual professionals being able to hold every single one of these services into our mind, but it's about broadening what our thinking is. If we were to come across somebody in a situation like Barry was, what potentially could we do? Who could we refer to for some additional support for somebody that is experiencing loneliness? So thank you for those discussions, they're really helpful.
Can I just mention before we move on there, Julie, friend has put in a link into the chat for around social prescribing directory.
Fabulous.
Really helpful. So we'll make sure that's incorporated as well, Julie. Thank you.
I think that's really useful. Thank you. Yeah, and if anybody has got any additional resources that they want to send our way to include within the pack that you get, please do feel free to do so. That's really helpful. As we've talked about, there was a lot of good practice that was going on for Barry, and it is really important that we acknowledge and recognise that in these types of events. And if you've not read the report, I know I've said it before, but I really would recommend that you do. It'll give you a feel for the involvement that the professionals had, just how frequently they were trying to problem solve with Barry and support him. And that was right through from SPA officers, GPs, mental health teams, Hawks, all sorts of people. Anybody that was involved with Barry really did try to support him. And one of the things that came out of the report is that Barry had always been listened to by professionals, and that is so important. Even where arguably something wasn't a certain professional's role, they still took that time to listen to those concerns as well as acting upon them. And the report highlights that the GP particularly provided a high level of service, and he was very good at moving forward any of his physical health needs as well, and making sure that Barry was able to access support for those. It's noted within the report that there was excellent record keeping, which supported the understanding of what the key learning from Barry's case was, which is what the report pulled together. And despite his rural location, practitioners and professionals met with Barry frequently, and this was on a face-to-face basis, and they did try their utmost to support him. Barry was well supported by the health and wellbeing coach, and that health and wellbeing coach worked regularly with him to identify what his goals were. The report also pointed out that the concerns about Barry's mental health were responded to quickly by the Alice service, and it's really important that we recognise and are grateful for all of that support and hard work that those practitioners that were involved in Barry's care offered him, because it did make a difference. Lovely. I'm just going to pass over to Kelly. Just before I do, can I just double check if you've come back from the meeting rooms? I should have said this earlier. If you can just double check that your mic is on mute. I'm just getting a little bit of background noise. I don't know if anybody else is. Thank you.
Brilliant. So we'll come back to closing comments around Barry in just a really short moment. What we just want to do now is bring your attention, and apologies, there's a few people on the group who attended Wednesday's session, so some of these slides you've seen before, but for those of you who haven't seen these previously, we just want to draw your attention to the Cumbria Safeguarding Adults Board website. Obviously, the purpose of the Safeguarding Adults Board is really meeting the needs of our local population. It's around that protection, it's around about identifying our most vulnerable within society, and really doing everything we possibly can to meet the needs, to learn from any issues, cases, such as the events which are being held today. So there is a statutory function which comes alongside the Care Act, which the board needs to undertake. So we just want to kind of draw your attention to the purpose of the board and the resources which are available for you. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please, Colette. So in terms of the website, if you haven't been on there before, please go and have a little look around and see what's available for you to access. So the teams across Cumbria who work with, on the board have developed a range of guidance tools and support tools in order to really provide a consistent approach across Cumbria as to what we're doing to safeguard vulnerable adults. And one of those tools is known as the threshold tool. Some of you will be really familiar with this, others have probably never heard of it before. But this guidance, like I've mentioned, it's will identify a consistent approach for us as agencies all to work from. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Colette. And you can access the threshold tool via this link once you receive the presentation. And once you go onto that link, or you can just type it into the website. If we go on to the next page, the tool includes lots of what to do in the event of kind of scenarios, really, in order to raise a safeguarding inquiry and referral into the local authority. And just very briefly, it includes all the different categories of abuse, which is defined by the Care Act 2014. So from a health kind of perspective, we're looking at falls, pressure ulcers, medication errors, service user on service user incidents, and how to manage those kind of key issues, really. But if we move on to the next slide, Colette, please. What you will see, I don't expect you to be able to read this now, but in the guidance and document, it will go through all those different categories of abuse. So here it's around physical abuse, traffic light rag rating system. So where there's a low risk which has occurred in terms of physical abuse, it will detail there what the issues are and actually what outcome and action you should take. So if we go into the high risk element, where there's been a physical abuse, there's an unexplained injury or assault has happened, it will direct you to raise a safeguarding inquiry into the local authority. So all agencies have access to this tool, and we should all be working from this in order to, make referrals into the system. So that's just to give you a bit of a visual aid of what it looks like. If we go on to the next slide, please. And in order to raise those concerns, contact numbers here, which I'm sure everybody is fully aware of across the county. And just being mindful if it is an emergency and a 999 call needs to happen, that's the route in which you should be taking. But there's the in-hours and out-of-hours teams available there for you to make reference to, following on from today's session. And if we just go on to the next slide, Colette. Oh, this is for yourself at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. So in Cumbria, we've got an information sharing agreement, and it's been agreed by the statutory partner organisations. And the guidance is intended to summarise the key elements of information sharing when working with adults at risk of abuse or neglect. And it also aims to increase the understanding of the basic principles of information sharing relating to safeguarding practice in particular. And sharing the right information at the right time with the right people is fundamental to good practice in safeguarding, but it's often highlighted as a difficult area of practice. And the Care Act emphasises the need to empower people to balance choice and control for individuals against preventing harm and reducing risk, as well as responding proportionately to safeguarding concerns. And if you follow, again, another embedded link here, if you follow the link within the slides, it will take you to the Cumbria Safeguarding Adult Board Information Sharing Guidance. And there's a nice flow chart there that you can look at and refer back to. And just again, you guys are all professional people. This will not be new information to you, but just a reminder as to why we share information within adult safeguarding. Obviously, in terms of really significant things, it can prevent death or serious harm, coordinate effective and efficient responses, enable early interventions to prevent the escalation of risk. It can prevent abuse and harm that may increase the need for care and support, and maintain and improve good practice in safeguarding adults. It can also reveal patterns of abuse that were previously undetected and could identify others at risk of abuse. It can identify low-level concerns that may reveal people at risk of abuse. And it can help people to access the right kind of support to reduce risk and promote well-being. As well as that, it can also help to identify people who may pose a risk to others, and where possible work to reduce offending behaviour. And it can also reduce organisational risk and protect reputation. And in terms of sharing information within safeguarding, just a reminder that GDPR is not and should not be a barrier to sharing information. It should provide a framework for ensuring that information is shared appropriately. And there's just some sort of tips there for how to do that in the best way. So about being open and honest with the person from the outset about why, what and how and with who you're sharing their information, and to seek their agreement unless it's unsafe or inappropriate to do so. To seek advice if you've got any doubt, and you'll all have within your organisations a point of contact for that. If you've got concerns about whether you can share information, you should be checking that out first. Sharing with consent where appropriate and where possible. Respect the wishes of those who do not consent to share information, and you may still share information without consent if, in your judgment, that lack of consent can be overridden in the public interest. But you'll need to base your judgment on the facts of each individual case. We can't give a sort of one size fits all type guidance. So you need to be considering the safety and well-being, and base your information sharing on considerations of this and others who might be affected by any actions. Information needs to be necessary, proportionate, relevant, accurate and timely, and stored securely. And we should be keeping a record of our decisions and the reasons for why we are not sharing information, so that we've got that recorded on our own systems as well. Great. So just back over to you, Kelly.
Yeah, so just really some closing remarks about the Barry case, really. So the Safeguarding Adult Review focuses on how partner agencies work together to prevent harm for Barry and to meet his needs. So it's not clear whether any single agency or multi-agency interventions would have prevented Barry from taking his own life. Although many single agency contacts and responses were well-meaning and addressed short-term needs and physical medical needs, this repeated approach wasn't effective in meeting Barry's needs in a lasting way. So it's unknown what effect a multi-agency response would have had for Barry, because it wasn't considered or instigated. A multi-agency approach needed to be tried so that he could have been assessed in his needs in its entirety. So information could have been shared and actions allocated to address his multiple presentations. With the lack of coordination between agencies and lack of understanding of who needed to take the leadership role, in reality, any of the agencies or professionals could have taken responsibility for this. This was compounded by a lack of knowledge about what options were available outside of the area of individual practitioners' expertise. With over 100 referrals made about Barry, it's probable that Barry would still be in the same situation if he was alive, but the amount of referrals should have led to that multi-agency meeting, robust supervisory oversight and coordination of his needs in his case. So, you know, that's to just kind of close Barry's case, really. And we really do hope that you found these sessions useful and helpful. And even with that single discussion which we had in our group, hopefully it will make you think a little bit differently in any of those cases which are just a little bit stuck and going around the system and you know, being managed as we would like. So hopefully you'll be able to take some information back away from these sessions, and if that's the case, then Colette and myself, you know, we've you know, achieved what we needed to out of this session. Just to say, any questions which I haven't seen any questions come up, but just to note, Julie Friend has put in about a social prescribing officers can do presentations giving an overview of how it works in the Copeland area, if anyone would find that useful for their organisations. She's put her contact details in the meeting chat, which we can send out following the meeting. Have just asked if Julie has contacts for the south areas, so if so, that would be helpful to know. But contact details there for the Cumbria Safeguarding Adults Board, and on the very last slide, just a little thank you from myself and Colette for sitting through and getting involved and participating in today's discussion. And hopefully if you've enjoyed it, and if you need any further information, our contact details are there. So thank you very much. Anything you wish to add, Colette?
No, just thanks very much, particularly on a Friday afternoon. Thank you so much for your engagement and discussions. It's really appreciated.